August the 7th, 2019, and this is 508, a show about Worcester. I'm Mike Benedetti. This is Brendan Melican.
How's it going, brother?
Brendan, it's going good. How are you doing?
I'm well. These really nice chairs are not super ergonomic, and I feel like my posture is a little bit off. So if I sit awkwardly, I apologize in advance. I just don't want to have a sore back later.
I know. We need more adjustable chairs on this program. Yeah, I feel like setup-wise, this is our best setup we've had in 2 years.
This is stunning. We are still in an awkward small closet, but because of the amount of equipment that we've managed to shove into this awkward small closet, it seems like a completely professional setup.
It looks and sounds much less like a tiny closet.
Yeah, I'm happy with this.
You see, you were just telling me before the show about a Worcester Business Journal article, which I haven't read, so I can't tear it apart.
And I barely read it, so I'm going to make half of it up as we go along.
Please do.
No, you know what it was is it was actually a really nice piece about economic indicators and the way Worcester is starting to play catch up on a lot of economic indicators that we were sort of left behind on, either by other gateway cities or big cities, national stats and whatnot. But there were a couple things that I saw people starting to pick apart online that were a little bit concerning. That so the period that they were looking at data-wise was 2010 to 2017. It seems in that period of time there was like a decrease in the number of Worcester residents who had a bachelor's degree or higher. Okay. There was a decrease in the value per square foot of homes, and a increase in the overall poverty level. But the thing was that, you know, I was getting into a couple of conversations with folks on that front. I feel as though like there's been so many great stories in regional, national media about the city that like we have it in our head that like because Chronicle comes in and does a really nice story that like about Worcester changing, that everything changes overnight. Mm-hmm. And it seems like if you actually look at that period in time, like we have an aging population. And a very healthy immigrant population, right? Like, so you would look at both of those things and say, and we were a former, working class city, right? So like college education rates were always low, right? But they also are increasing quickly, right? As that aging population kind of disappears, either moves out or passes away. And more young people fill those slots, as well as seeing immigrant populations nationally, leapfrogging their peers in terms of education attainment rates and earnings potential much faster than previous waves of immigration. It just seemed like an odd period of time to look at that. Like, yes, we're lagging. Of course we're lagging, but lagging for 70 years. That's like the story of a lot of like middle cities and secondary cities is lag. I was taken aback by how it seemed a lot of folks expect things to change overnight. I think I said to you before the show, like, I think the best example is like New York, right? Like you and I probably, I mean, I know I have, you probably remember the tail end of a New York City. That was not the kind of place that you would bring like family to like have like a fantastic vacation. Like when 42nd Street was more like the Deuce, not like what it is today.
Yeah, I only ever had one trip to New York during that era, but I definitely saw that part of it. Sure.
And we're not that old. Like we're old, but we're not that old. Right? It takes time for cities to change, and I feel like that's like both on a local level where you got folks that are all queued up to say, "Look, told you so." Worcester can't get anything right, as well as from an outside perspective, like people expect positive results, to be immediate. It's like I would assume best case scenario, like if Worcester were to achieve like a real turnaround and start getting back on its feet in a real meaningful way, that's something that takes decades. It's not something like we'd be lucky if we saw that in our lifetimes where we'd really be able to celebrate it. Like you would hope that it would be the kids behind us would be the ones who would really be able to appreciate all the work that's going into the city now. That's all.
So we've really been more building the foundation for prosperity than
after
experiencing prosperity.
After years of stagnation. And I think a part of it too is that how long for how long was Worcester completely ignored, or at best just the brunt of a joke from the rest of the region, right? Yes. Now suddenly it's getting some attention, but like a couple thousand, young professionals or people from Metro West moving to the city, I mean, that's a statistical anomaly in terms of offsetting a city that has, I think it was like a 30%, bachelor degree or higher education attainment rate, right? Wow. Like you're going to need a lot of people to come in for that number to shift upward to where you would hope it would be. And I don't even know where we would hope it to be, right? Because like maybe that's something that starts to dip down again as college costs continue to increase, and you have a generation that comes up saying, hey, maybe I don't want to go to college now. I want to go into a trade or something. There's so many other factors that go into that. It just seems like it was a great story overall, but there were so many things that I think allowed for people to complain about that were somewhat unfounded.
I do want to run through the numbers on this, and maybe next week
We should totally bring it back up because there's so much data in there. Yeah. It was an economist from up at Holy Cross that did it. I'm not knocking any of the research that was done. I mean, it's just data. It's great data for the city to be looking at. I think it was just how quick some people were to criticize the data as indicative of how Worcester can't get anything right. So, man, like we're getting a lot right, but like good things don't happen for a city of 185,000 people overnight. Again, it takes like decades to change.
You know, this week I was talking to a friend of mine who's from a small town about the latest small town gossip that they had gotten from a friend, and I was like, as somebody who also is from a small town and gets small town gossip periodically, I was like, I can guess what it is, which is that it's all going to be personal tragedy, just a huge array of personal tragedy plus. Like, we got a Chipotle. And that's pretty much what it was. In fact, it was all just like suicide attempts and divorces and crimes and brain damage and also like a great franchise restaurant moving into the area. I sometimes I feel like Worcester news looks like that, right? That it's all like, oh, we're getting a Ruth's Chris Steakhouse and we're really building some great parking stuff. And plus we have like a bunch of murdering and drug dealing going on. But if you want to be part of that murdering and drug dealing, there's going to be places for you to eat and park.
Which is great.
Yeah, that somehow the positive human angles of these things just don't, they're just hard to quantify. They're not newsworthy.
Well, they're not covered at all,
police
right?
reports on them. Yeah.
There's no feel-good story of the of the day. And it's no, I mean, and it's also, I think, indicative as well, too, of how we tend to view wherever we're from, small town, big city, based on our circle of influence, right? And like you have a wildly varied circle of influence, way more than I do. But I think there was a couple months ago, we were looking at some data, transportation data on people commuting into Boston. And I remember both of us kind of getting to the line of how many people actually commute into Boston every day and being a little bit shocked because the number seemed really small relative to what we thought it would be. And it was, at least I was shocked because I think it was like 3,000 people or something like that. It wasn't a huge number. But like, if I were to do a polling of a lot of my circle, of people I deal with on a daily basis, the majority of them are commuting towards Boston every day. But that's not indicative of the city. That's indicative of my really limited scope of penetration into a city of 185,000 people. And I think that's, again, part of the problem. Why Worcester's always been called like a big small town. And I think that parallel is correct, that when we are talking about ourselves, oftentimes we're talking about the few hundred or a few thousand people that might be, a loose part of our life. We have no idea what the other 182,000 people are up to, right? And it's probably something that is not very similar to what we do on a day-to-day basis. It's a big city. And even in a small town, if you don't know everybody, if you're not from a small town of like 50 people or 800 people, right? Like, chances are good people are up to some stuff that might surprise you. And yeah.
In one of his novels, Graham Greene commented that every city, no matter how big it is, to one of its residents is 50 people in a couple dozen streets.
Yeah.
And I think that this is not a sign of our personal parochialism. I think this is a sign of how our limited brains construct reality, is that we're just not well evolved to deal with 100,000 people and hundreds of streets. And so we just kind of filter it down to like, these are the really important things that I can actually keep track of.
You know where I think you see that a lot, and it has nothing to do with cities or sociology or anything really? Zoos. Right, like this is the this is the problem I've with a personal sort of like moral dilemma I've always had with zoos. Right, like I think fortunate enough as a kid where like I get to experience a lot of really big like world class zoos. Right, but even as a kid, you can't not feel bad for an animal that's like stuck in a cage. Right, like you watch a gorilla, no matter how nice that environment is. It's just grim, right? That gorilla has better places to be than in that box, or like a couple of rhinos sitting in, a wading pool at the San Diego Zoo, right? Like, I'm sure they're very well taken care of, but those rhinos probably wish they were somewhere else.
Yeah.
Or if they were somewhere else, would probably like a little bit better. But at the same time, right, if you didn't have those places to go to actually observe those animals, would you be able to actually like make them exist in your head, right? Like, just if your only experience with an animal is David Attenborough.
As a veteran of African safaris, the answer is yes. But
as a veteran, you went to go see them, right? Like, But if if your best exposure to an animal that only existed on another continent was a David Attenborough special,
You wouldn't go
it
to
might be
visualize it.
really hard for you to appreciate how magnificent they are and why so many of them deserve as much protecting, say, as like humans do, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it kind of is this. Like our brain is not good at just capturing all of reality, right? Because there's a lot going on out there. It can only capture what's in front of it right now, and we're all limited in terms of what we put in front of our faces.
Brendan, the national and international news today are discouraging. So I'm going to start saying this every episode because every episode it will be true, no matter how long it takes me to finally put it back online. People
no matter
will be
when
like,
you
how
watch
did you
this?"
know? How did you predict it? The national and international news today is discouraging, so I want to bring it back to Worcester news. The Big Y supermarket chain has stopped offering plastic shopping bags. The biggest blog post I still ever did was about this thing that Scott Schaefer Duffy and I did 14 years ago now, where we hand sewed a bunch of cloth shopping bags and silk screened some stuff on them and handed them out to shoppers at the local Big Y, and telling them don't use these plastic bags. And yeah, it's just sort of funny to see this like become now it's like a thing which sure, plenty of supermarket chains are just like trying to get ahead of this whole trend and just doing it. And 14 years ago, was still a time when like you would buy stuff, and if you brought your own bag, the cashier would kind of side eye you and be like, "I'm just going to put this stuff in a plastic bag. I'm not going to have to keep shifting gears for every persnickety customer with their own bag."
So as long as we've lived together, my wife has that's what we've done, but she started it. And I have to admit, like right out of the gate, going to the supermarket, like carrying all of these bags, like to go to do like a weekly shopping for like a family, it was probably one of the most anxiety driving things initially in my life. But because like you couldn't help but feel like you were on a stage, like everybody around you is like,
People
oh,
looking at
these
you.
people, like they're coming in with their tote bags or whatever. Now it's normal though, right? I mean, everybody kind of does do it, and it is neat with the way corporations, I think, like Big Y, and kudos to them for doing it. It's probably driven by trying to get ahead of any losses that might come down the road from legislative maneuvering.
From being forced to do this.
Yeah, and in that sense, it's actually really smart. But I mean, man, I can't believe that we're still having this conversation. To be honest with you, it's
it's funny to think about.
it's going to be kind of interesting to see if there's potential that by the time we get to the election this year, the only place you'll be able to get a plastic bag in Worcester is from Worcester City Hall.
I'm just thinking about, my dad, as I pointed out in the past, has just exclusively used reusable bags for just decades now. And although he's a big environmentalist, I don't think the impetus for him has ever been environmental. It's always been the same reason that like a Navy SEAL, if they're going to go on a mission, is going to bring like a really sweet knife.
Yeah.
Because like somebody else some amateur would be like, well, if I needed to stab something, there's probably sticks I could break in half. There might be a pointy rock. Yeah. I can figure something out on the ground when I get there. I'm not going to be prepared. Whereas the Navy SEAL is like, I need the best tools possible because this is like, I'm serious about this. And I'm the same thing with my father. He's just like, I can't use those bags. Those bags are not going to, if you're a serious shopper like me, those bags are not going to cut it, man. Yeah. You're going to have crisis after crisis unnecessarily.
Yes. No, I'm with it.
Brendan, you know what government chose their leader randomly, at least partially?
No. Did we have one?
There was. The Republic of Venice from 1268 to 1797. Here's an article from...
Here I was thinking I was being novel with my suggestion.
I know,
we randomly...
I think it was the day after the last time that you were talking about this. I mean, many people have talked about in many fora and many items of fiction the idea that we should just pick a president or a leader randomly from among the populace, especially from among the unwilling part of the populace. This is an article from Alexei Tereshchenko. He says, for more than 5 centuries, from 1268 to 1797, the procedure to elect the Doge, the chief of state of Venice, did not change. First round, you choose 30 members of the Great Council by lot. These 30 are reduced by lot to 9. These 9 people choose 40 other people. These 40 are reduced by lot to 12. These 12 people choose 25 other people. These 25 people are reduced by lot to 9. These 9 people choose 45 other people. These 45 people are reduced by lot to 11. These 11 people choose 41 other people. These 41 people elect the Doge. By the way, despite the fact that he was elected for life, the power of the chief of state in Venice was very much limited. He could not appear in public without other officials present, which gives you security from populism. He could not meet foreign diplomats or open foreign dispatches without other officials present, giving you security from collusion with foreign governments. And he could not possess any property in a foreign land. And so the initial question I'm sure everybody has is, why so many rounds of alternating voting and randomness? I assume it's because, those 40 people who were elected by some 9 people, like those 40 people were an actual part of the government. They're the Council of Trade or the Council of Judiciary or whatever. And then those 40 people, 12 of them are selected randomly, and then those 12 people choose the council of something else.
Right.
And so the final council of 41 is the people who get to elect the leader.
Right.
But you get to be one of those 41 people by the process of all the other aspects of government, either choosing random members of the citizenship or those random members voting on.
And with that many rounds, it makes any sort of collusion, at least statistically, difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the problem with this for, say, the city of Worcester to do this is if we chose, if we were like, okay, we're going to choose 11 members of the city council by lot, I feel like the possibility, I don't know if people would really trust that process, like that they would trust the honesty of the process, that they wouldn't feel like, oh yeah, well, somebody in City Hall is just manipulating the random number generator.
That's possible, but I mean, I think when I
guess if it's, I guess you can say like.
See, I look at it. I think it becomes the best lottery in the world. When and that's the perspective you'd have to take on it, right? Like you're giving everybody the opportunity because our government is a part-time government. So with the exception of the city manager, that we won't change that for the time being. We'll get our legs under us first with all this randomness. You're basically giving $30,000 a year lottery winnings to anybody in the city.
I mean, maybe, so I think here's actually how you do it in a way that seems trustworthy. This is one way at least, where you would just say, okay, everybody in Worcester who's open to being the mayor, file some paperwork.
No, it has to be the unwilling. The unwilling need to be a part of this.
Well, whatever.
And potentially cats.
We assign every member of every resident of the city of Worcester a number who's going to be an acceptable mayoral candidate. We assign them a number, say a 5-digit number, because there's probably not going to be more than 100,000 people who are going to be on that list, and then that becomes a matter of public record. And then you just say, like, I don't know, like, do they eventually calculate like the Dow Jones Industrial Average down to like 20 decimal places? Because if so, you could just say like, okay, and on election day, at the close of business, the last 5 of those decimals, which are random enough, the last 5 of those 20 decimals, nobody can manipulate those last 5 decimals. It's impossible. That will be who it is. So we sort of know in advance what everybody's number is, and you can verify, yes, okay, the numbers look legit. And then you just let some outside and publicly verifiable source of randomness that nobody has any control over pick the leader.
I think what you need is a system, and maybe you could build it off of, I can't believe we're actually talking about this, but use the selective service model, right? So that's probably the best example we have of a system that catalogs everybody who's alive in the country at an age when, when you're approaching 18 for the purposes of military service, but it also is that designator for when you're eligible to vote and participate in government on that level. That would be the easiest thing, I think, to do is you're just siphoning off that registration point and build from there.
So you're just saying as people are registering for selective service, they're also registering.
Well, they got to figure out who everybody else is as well too, because That's
the problem. Is municipally, this is a hard thing to do because every time somebody moves in and out of town. I mean, maybe honestly, even though I think doing it among the unwilling would be in some hilarious sense ideal.
I know it has to happen.
If you were willing to do it among the willing, you just make that part of the voter registration process. So you get your paperwork back from City Hall, and they're like, "Here's your 5-digit voter registration for the next election."
I want a mayor who wasn't even previously aware of what city they were living in. No, lives here, but wasn't even paying attention to what city they were in. They're just here.
They're like, I think I'm in Massachusetts, probably. Yeah. How would I know?
But they've got opinions, and I want to hear them.
The preliminary municipal election is coming up on Tuesday, September the 10th. There are a bunch of challengers for both the city council and the school committee, and the preliminary election will decide who makes it to the final ballot in November. And there's actually maybe a couple of issues at stake here. It has been said by some local activists that since Councillor Lukes is leaving and she has been the deciding vote, keeping us with a low residential tax rate at the cost of a high business tax rate, that if, for example, Tony Economou is elected to replace her, he would be open to probably having less than the lowest possible residential tax rate, if not the highest possible tax rate, that the other likely people would be probably on the side of the lowest, have either said or would probably be inside the lowest residential tax rate. So this is kind of one choice you have is if you would like to have less than the lowest residential tax rate, you can vote for Tony, and otherwise you could vote for somebody else.
That's how we're.
Bill Coleman has asked us to have what I guess would be a non-binding resolution on the ballot that would say, should we use plastic bags for recycling, or should we use open-topped bins like animals? And if it puts it in those terms, I support it. If it doesn't, I don't support it. It seems like a waste of time.
Complete waste of time, but whatever.
Recycling, man. Again, like this is this thing, right? This thing of materialism. We're just once items come into our life, we're obsessed by them, and then we're obsessed with how they get discarded. But so much less obsessed with how they come into the world because we're not part of that process, and we just don't. Again, that's like the thing about our limited perspective on living in a city. We also have that limited perspective of items. I just think we have it. Unless maybe we're enlightened beings, we just have that.
No, I mean, that's an important, maybe we can add that to the list of requirements for our randomly selected leadership here in the city. Is the first thing you have to do is go visit landfills and repositories of collected trash and recycling, right? So you can actually visualize the amount of garbage that is coming out of your city and use that as a starting point to solve meaningful problems like that.
I've been meaning to visit the Worcester, get a tour of the Worcester trash and recycling processing for years. I feel like everything that I know about that, I basically learned on the street from people who went there at some point in the last 40 years. I have no idea how much of that information is valid or current.
Yeah, no, and it seems like it's a rapidly changing landscape because we have fewer and fewer meaningful ways, especially on the recycling side, of eliminating waste.
Speaking of our favorite show, I was just watching season 3 of The Wire yesterday, and one of the opening scenes where Bubbles and the dude he's running with are like wheeling an old radiator and a bunch of other pieces of metal around in a shopping cart, and they take it to a scrap metal yard. And I was trying to explain to some young people the other day about this house in the neighborhood, how it had been stripped and how it was being rebuilt. And I sort of felt like I was telling them about living during the Depression, where I was like, there was a time, kids, where people used to steal the copper pipes and wires out of a house. It wasn't that long ago.
It was not that long
ago. Now
it
seems a little bit weird.
Yeah. I mean, it seemed like it was a regular occurrence after the market collapse that you'd be hearing stories about houses that were stripped after foreclosure.
Before the market collapse, circa 2007, this was definitely true. Circa 2006, this was definitely true.
Need more pecs out there, Mike.
Brent crude oil is $58 a barrel, down 9% on the week and down 21% on the year. Bitcoin is $11,700, up 17% on the week and up 80% on the year.
Well, missed that boat once again.
Although compared to its all-time high, Bitcoin is still like down,
half.
50%, 40%, something like that. So depends on when you buy this stuff.
That's it, huh?
That's kind of this is kind of what I got on the list this week. I mean, I feel like these municipal elections they do feel like a good one to vote for me. We'll probably have our endorsements show here in a couple of weeks. I still feel strongly like I want to endorse all challengers, at least for the prelims. Vote for all of them. Anybody who's not an incumbent, just vote for them just to get them on the ballot. We were talking a little bit last time about the ways in which, especially school committee people, are ombudsmen, and how do you connect those ombudsmen with as many people as possible. And it makes me think that the way that we do elections could pick out the people with the most connections, but it doesn't. If we had a thing where you only get to vote for one city councilor, and then the top 6 vote getters get in there, then you're like, great, we have the top 6 people who have a wide network in the city, a wide and non-overlapping networks in the city. But the way that we have it now, it could be all 6 of those people could have the exact same large network that votes for those 6 people, and that's who gets in. This is one reason that I tend to endorse challengers, and especially a diverse number of people is. Diverse kinds of people, diverse backgrounds are probably helpful as far as issues go, but issues are not that important to these elected positions compared to the ombudsman thing. Right. But that diversity is what's bringing you in, a diverse constituency of people who are, you know, you got Gary Rosen in there, and you got Sarai Rivera in there, and like if you're some random Puerto Rican dude, probably way more likely that you like know Sarai or are going to be just run into Sarai somewhere and be able to connect with her than Gary, and vice versa. If you're some random crazy person, you're going to be way more comfortable approaching Gary Rosen probably than Sarai Rivera. Not as 100%, not even close to 100%,
Nope.
but probably enough that it's maybe worth. I tend to vote that way. Like I will definitely vote for like Tea Party people on the ballot if there's no Tea Party people already in office, just because otherwise our Tea Party people have nobody to just like complain to when they're shooting the breeze every week.
Sure. No, that's well, and I think you just kind of brought things right back to the talking about small town gossip sort of thing too, right? Because ultimately, if there's any problem with our system of elections locally, but also state and nationally, it's not the number of candidates or the potential of candidates. It's the pool of active voters, right? Which has just gotten smaller and smaller. And now it's very much representative of a very slim demographic in the city of Worcester. We don't have a very engaged population citywide. We have a predictably engaged population that keeps showing up year after year, but also getting smaller and smaller year after year. And that's the thing that, yeah, I mean, our elections seem boring and without much, I don't know, change. Well, because the people that are voting aren't changing, right? They're literally the same people every year, minus a few. So there isn't much room for growth there. But as the city's population changes overall slowly, you can see where those persons will change both on the voting side and the folks that are coming into office, and that's nice. But yeah, I like your idea of of forcing some shakeups every once in a while, and I do think that's where the value is as well when it comes to making sure people are being heard, right? Like, I don't need to agree with everybody that's an elected official in the city of Worcester, but I would much rather disagree with people on the council than know that there are people in the city who might have valid concerns or at least a need to be heard who aren't being heard at all. And I think that's been one of our challenges for quite some time here.
You know, I think that sometimes the issues are even less important, not just because the people who go in there tend to not be that driven by issues, but not just because our weird form of government means that we don't get to elect our executive, but because national and state regulations are so much more important than anything the Worcester City Council is allowed to even vote on. I was reminded of this week reading an article which was exploring this possibility that the Worcester bus system could become free, because as we've talked about, it's super expensive to transport somebody by this bus system, and the amount of money that comes from fares is very small. But I believe it was Holden man Dennis Lipka, the WRTA administrator, or one somebody else with a similar kind of a role, who said, like, part of what we actually have to do legally as part of the fact that the federal government gives us money is we have to be able to give them statistics about like how far are different people traveling and how many trips are we doing, and like fares are how we track that. So like the idea that we're just going to have like just wander on and up the bus freely is like, well, we would have to consider the fact that we may be violating, you know, we may not be able to generate the statistics that we're legally allowed to generate. It's such a bizarre limitation. But
something tells me we have some technological solutions for that too, right? I mean, like we could
cameras
or like one of those
surveillance,
old school little clickers that people used at concerts to tell how many people were coming into a show, right? I mean, like we do know how to count people. This is not we don't need to invent the technology.
How are you going to know that I got off this bus and got onto this bus and traveled 3 miles and whatever? They're not going to pay attention to me personally.
Even if we had a notepad or and a pencil where somebody wrote down, like, okay, this person got on in Holden.
Now you've doubled the cost of transport.
I'm just saying,
paper's expensive.
I'm guessing that we can figure out how people are moving around without fares. That's yeah.
That's honestly probably the way to do it. It's so creepy and insane. Probably wouldn't cost that much. Oh, brother. Thanks for watching the 508 show, guys. Thanks for supporting us. I think we're fixing to finish up our interviews of school committee members, and then I guess or school committee non-members.
How many more do we have?
Challengers? One or two.
Okay.
One of them I haven't been able to contact, and the other one I ran into last week, and I think we'll try to do them next week.
Okay.
And then we'll just see how the elections go, and maybe we'll talk to some council challengers after the preliminary election, and otherwise we'll just talk to dynamic individuals from the city of Worcester.
Doing cool stuff.
Like just like you at home are going to do this week. This is 508.
Have a good one.
Bye, guys.
You know, we didn't talk about that. What we should have brought up was Paul.